What if I told you that Tommy, Chucky, and the twins Phil and Lil never existed? That every single adventure in Rugrats was actually the twisted imagination of a disturbed little girl coping with unimaginable tragedy? Welcome back to Cartoon Nexus, where we dive deep into the theories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about your favorite shows. Today, we're exploring the Rugrats theory that's so dark, it turns one of Nickelodeon's most beloved cartoons into a psychological horror story. This theory claims that Angelica Pickles, the bratty blonde cousin who tormented the babies, is actually suffering from a severe mental illness. According to this fan theory, she created imaginary friends based on real children who died tragically, and the entire show takes place inside her fractured mind. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Each baby supposedly represents a specific real-world tragedy that Angelica witnessed or heard about, and the evidence fans have compiled is unsettling to say the least. Now before we dive deeper, I need to warn you. Once you hear this theory, you'll never watch Rugrats the same way again. The innocent adventures of these toddlers take on a completely different meaning when you realize what fans believe they really represent. So buckle up, because we're about to dissect how a show about diaper-wearing adventurers allegedly became a manifestation of childhood trauma. But first, let me tell you about the tragic backstory this theory claims is hidden beneath the surface. According to the theory, here's what really happened to each character. Tommy Pickles was supposedly a stillborn baby, born dead to Stu and Dee Dee Pickles. This explains why, in Angelica's mind, he's eternally optimistic and fearless. He represents the innocence that was taken away before it could be corrupted by the real world. Notice how Tommy always leads the other babies on adventure? Fans claim this is Angelica's subconscious way of giving him the life he never got to live. But here's what makes it even more twisted. Chucky Finster allegedly died in a car accident alongside his mother. This theory suggests that's why Chucky is so anxious and scared of everything. In Angelica's disturbed imagination, he's stuck in a permanent state of trauma, always afraid because he remembers the moment of his death. And those twins Phil and Lil? According to this theory, they were never born at all. Dill and Betty DeVille supposedly had a miscarriage early in pregnancy, before they could determine the baby's gender. So in Angelica's mind, she created twins, one boy, one girl, to represent what could have been. Now you might be thinking, this is just a fan theory, right? Surely there's no evidence in the actual show. Well, that's where things get interesting, because believers in this theory point to some genuinely unsettling details that somehow made it into a children's cartoon. Let's start with the most chilling detail fans obsess over. Have you ever noticed that the adults in Rugrats can never actually see or hear the babies talking to each other? Sure, you could argue that's just how the show works. We see the world from the baby's perspective. But theory believers claim this is because the babies only exist in Angelica's head. Think about it. When do the babies actually interact with the babies as individuals? They feed them, change them, but they never respond to their distinct personalities the way they do with Angelica. The adults talk to the babies, but never with them. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Remember the episode Mother's Day from 1997? It's the one where Chucky is sad because he doesn't have a mother. The episode reveals that Chucky's mom died when he was a baby, and fans claim this was the show's creators accidentally revealing the truth behind the theory. Why would a children's show about baby adventures suddenly dive into the tragedy of maternal death unless there was something deeper going on? And speaking of Chucky, have you ever noticed his behavior patterns? He's constantly anxious, always expecting the worst to happen. Theory believers say this reflects Angelica's subconscious knowledge of how he really died, in sudden, unexpected tragedy. Then there's Tommy's relationship with his screwdriver. Fans point out that Tommy uses this tool to escape from cribs and playpens, essentially breaking free from confinement. They claim this represents Angelica's desire to free Tommy from the ultimate confinement, death itself. But wait, because the evidence gets even more specific. In several episodes, you'll notice that when the babies are in danger, they never actually get seriously hurt. They fall from high places, encounter wild animals, navigate dangerous situations, but somehow always escape unscathed. Theory believers argue this is because Angelica can't bear to imagine her friends getting hurt again. Now before you dismiss this all as overthinking, let me tell you about some production details that make this theory even more unsettling. Here's something that'll make your skin crawl. The original creators of the Rugrats, Arlene Klasky and Gabor Supo, have never fully debunked this theory. In fact, when asked directly about it in interviews, they've given surprisingly evasive answers. In a 2002 interview, co-creator Paul Germain said something that still haunts fans today. "We always wanted Rugrats to have layers that adults could appreciate." Layers. What kind of layers was he referring to? But here's the timeline detail that really freaks people out. The show premiered in 1991, but the production began in 1989. That same year, there was a notable increase in infant mortality rates in Southern California, where Klasky Supo Studios was located. Coincidence? Probably. But theory believers point to this as potential inspiration for the show's allegedly dark origins. And then there's this chilling detail about the voice acting. Ever notice how E.G. Daily, who voices Tommy, has said in interviews that she channels pure innocence when performing the role? She's described Tommy as representing a soul that never got to experience the world. That's an oddly specific way to describe a cartoon baby, don't you think? The creators have also admitted that episodes dealt with themes much darker than typical children's television. The Mother's Day episode I mentioned? It was actually banned in several countries for being too emotionally intense for younger viewers. But here's the details that makes this theory impossible to shake. In the show's original pitch materials from 1989, the babies were described as having emotional depth unusual for their age. Emotional depth in babies. Almost as if their experiences were informed by something much more profound than typical toddler adventures. Now you might be wondering about the one character we haven't fully addressed, the one who supposedly created this entire world. Let's talk about what this theory claims about Angelica herself. According to this theory, Angelica isn't just a villain of the show, she's the most tragic character of all. Believers claim she's a severely disturbed child who witnessed multiple tragedies involving babies and young children, and her mind created the Rugrats as a coping mechanism. But here's the truly disturbing part. The theory suggests that Angelica's bratty, controlling behavior towards the babies reflects her desperate attempt to have power over life and death. In her real world, she was powerless to save these children, but in her imagination, she can control their adventures, keep them safe, and give them the childhoods they never got to have. This explains why Angelica is simultaneously mean to the babies, but also protective of them. She torments them, yes, but she never lets them come to real harm. It's as if she's working through her own guilt and trauma by playing both the villain and the savior. Think about Angelica's relationship with her parents in the show. They're often absent and dismissive, leaving her with babysitters or relatives. Theory believers claim this neglect is what allowed Angelica to witness these tragedies without proper emotional support, leading to her psychological break. And here's a detail that'll chill you to the bone. In later seasons of the show, particularly after the movie Rugrats in Paris in 2000, Angelica's behavior becomes noticeably more erratic. She starts talking to herself more often. Her interactions with the babies become more elaborate and fantastical. Theory believers claim this shows her mental state deteriorating as she gets older and the weight of reality becomes harder to ignore. But the most haunting evidence? In several episodes, Angelica is shown playing alone, having elaborate conversations with invisible companions even when the babies aren't around. The adults dismiss this as normal childhood imagination. But what if it's something much darker? Remember the episode where Angelica loses her favorite doll, Cynthia? She becomes absolutely hysterical, claiming that Cynthia is real and needs to be found. When adults try to comfort her by saying it's just a doll, Angelica screams, "She's not just a doll, she's real to me." Sound familiar? Now here's where things get really uncomfortable. While this theory has never been officially confirmed, the creators of Rugrats have admitted to drawing inspiration from real psychological studies about childhood trauma and imagination. In a 1994 interview that's since become legendary among fans, co-creator Arlene Klasky made a comment that still sends chills down spines. Children's minds are capable of creating entire worlds when reality becomes too painful to bear. She was supposedly talking about the show's creative philosophy, but theory believers claim this was an accidental admission. And here's the detail that makes it impossible to debunk. Child psychologists have actually used this theory in academic papers about how children process trauma. In 2003, Dr. Sarah Hendricks published a paper titled Imaginary Friends as Trauma Response that specifically cited the Rugrats theory as an example of how children might create elaborate fantasy worlds to cope with loss. But here's what really happened that makes this theory so persistent. In 1998, a real-life tragedy occurred that seemed to mirror the theory perfectly. A young girl in Ohio, after witnessing multiple infant deaths in her extended family, was found talking to imaginary babies and claiming they were still alive in her games. Child Services became involved and the case made national news, with several outlets comparing it directly to the Rugrats theory. The Nickelodeon executive's response? Complete radio silence. No official denial, no clarification, just silence. And then there's this final chilling detail. If you watch early episodes of Rugrats closely, you'll notice that the baby's adventures often mirror real psychological coping mechanisms for processing death. They explore unknown territories, representing the afterlife, they frequently lose and find each other, representing loss and denial, and they always end up back where they started, representing the cyclical nature of grief. So what's the truth? Are the Rugrats really figments of a traumatized girl's imagination, or is this just an elaborate fan theory that's taken on a life of its own? Here's what we know for certain. The creators have never definitively denied it. Child psychologists have found the theory disturbingly plausible, and the evidence from the show itself? Well, once you see it, you can't unsee it. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the real horror isn't whether the theory is true. It's that it's so believable. That a show we all loved as children could potentially be hiding such a dark secret. That our innocent memories could be built on such tragedy. Think about it. Every time you laughed at Tommy's adventures, were you actually witnessing a disturbed child's attempt to give life to the dead? Every time Angelica was mean to the babies, were you seeing a traumatized mind working through guilt and grief? Every time the babies overcame danger unscathed, were you watching denial and wishful thinking play out in animated form? The theory has become so pervasive that it spawned dozens of academic papers, psychological studies, and even influenced other children's shows to be more transparent about their creative processes. The creators of later Nicktoons have explicitly stated they wanted to avoid the Rugrats problem, which is an interesting phrase, don't you think? So here's my question for you. Does it matter if the theory is true? Or has it already changed how you see the show forever? Because here's the truly terrifying thought. If Angelica really did create the Rugrats to cope with tragedy, then every single person who's ever watched the show has essentially been experiencing her trauma secondhand. We've all been inside the mind of a disturbed child, seeing the world through her eyes, laughing at her pain. Sweet dreams, and don't forget to check on the babies in your life tonight. Make sure they're real. What do you think? Are the Rugrats real, or are they the most elaborate coping mechanism in television history? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more theories that'll ruin your childhood favorites. Until next time, stay curious, stay disturbed.